The ship came out of hyperspace like a dark blade cutting through silk. It was massive and black, covered in sharp angles that made it look like a predator even when it was still. The smaller ships near Station Omega-7 moved away quickly, like fish swimming from a shark. Inside the station's command center, watched the ship approach on the main screen. She was a small woman, barely reaching the shoulder of most species on the station. Her black hair was tied back in a simple knot, and her face was calm, showing nothing of what she felt inside. She had learned long ago that showing fear was the fastest way to become prey. "The delegation has requested docking permission," said the station's communication officer, a blue-skinned Meridian with 4 arms. His voice carried a slight shake. "Commander, are you certain you want to greet them personally? I could send Lieutenant instead." Shook her head. "The respect directness. If I send someone else, they will see it as weakness before negotiations even begin." "With respect, Commander," the officer said carefully, "they will see weakness regardless. You are human." Smiled, but there was no happiness in it. She had heard this 1,000 times before. Humans were the species to join the Galactic Union, and they were also the weakest. No claws, no fangs, no natural armor or venom or the ability to survive in vacuum. In a galaxy where strength determined worth, humans were at the bottom of every list. "Grant docking permission," said. "I will meet them at Bay 7. She walked through the station's corridors alone. Other species moved out of her way, but not out of respect. They simply did not want to be associated with her when they arrived. Understood. In the politics of the galaxy, standing near weakness could make you look weak too. Bay 7 was the largest docking area on the station, built to handle ships from the bigger species. Stood in the center of the empty floor, her hands clasped behind her back, waiting. The bay doors opened with a hiss of pressure equalization, and the walked through. They were terrifying. Each one stood over 8 feet tall, their bodies covered in short black fur that looked like it had been polished with oil. Their faces were somewhere between wolf and bear, with long snouts filled with teeth that could crush bone. Their eyes were the color of amber fire, and they moved with the easy grace of creatures who had never known what it was like to be hunted. There were 12 of them, but one walked in front. He was the largest, his shoulders as wide as was tall, and his fur was marked with silver streaks that showed his age and status. This was Alpha of the Northern Packs, and he was the reason these negotiations mattered so much. The controlled 17 star systems rich in minerals the Union needed. Getting them to agree to a trade deal could mean prosperity for dozens of worlds. Failing could mean war. Stopped 3 meters from and looked down at her. His amber eyes moved over her body slowly, measuring, judging, dismissing. When he spoke, his voice was like rocks grinding together. "This is the representative the Union sends, this small soft thing." The other laughed. It was an ugly sound, more like barking than anything joyful. Bowed her head slightly. "I am commander of the Galactic Union Diplomatic Corps. It is my honor to welcome the delegation to Station Omega-7. Leaned down, bringing his face close to hers. His breath was hot and smelled of meat. "I have killed creatures larger than you with a single swipe. I have torn ships apart with my bare hands, and you think you can negotiate with me?" Met his eyes without blinking. "I think I can try." Something flickered in his gaze. Not respect exactly, but maybe a tiny amount of curiosity. He straightened up and turned to his second, a female named. "The Union insults us," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "They send their weakest creature to treat with their strongest ally. Remember this when we discuss terms." "I will remember," replied, her lips pulling back to show her fangs. Pretended not to hear. She gestured toward the corridor behind her. "If you will follow me, I will show you to your quarters. We have prepared spaces that should meet standards for comfort and security." The delegation moved forward and fell into step beside. She had to take 3 steps for every one of his, but she kept pace without complaint. The other walked behind them, and she could feel their eyes on her back like physical pressure. They passed through several sections of the station and noticed something strange. Among the 12 adult, there were 3 smaller shapes. They were cubs, young ones who had not yet reached their full growth. The largest was perhaps 10 years old, standing only 6 feet tall. The smallest was barely 4 feet, clinging to the fur of an adult male who ignored her completely. Knew culture well enough to know this was unusual. Cubs were supposed to stay with the home pack until they completed their coming-of-age trial. Bringing them to a diplomatic mission was strange. She filed the information away and kept walking. The quarters she had prepared were in the station's largest section, with high ceilings and reinforced furniture that could handle weight. Inspected everything with a critical eye, running his claws along the walls, testing the strength of the beds. Acceptable, he finally said, barely. I am glad it meets your needs, replied. The first negotiation session is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Is there anything you require before then? Turned to look at her again. In the brighter light of the quarters, could see the scars that covered his arms and chest. This was a creature who had fought his way to leadership through blood and pain. He did not understand softness. He did not value mercy. I require nothing from you, human, he said. Tomorrow, we will discuss terms and you will learn that the do not compromise. We take what we want and we destroy what stands in our way. This has always been true and it will always be true. I understand, said. No, replied, showing his fangs in what might have been a smile. You do not, but you will. Bowed and left the quarters. As the door closed behind her, she heard the laughing again. She walked back toward her own section of the station, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. When she was certain she was alone, she allowed herself one small sigh. This was going to be difficult. But as she walked, she did not notice the 3 small shapes that had slipped away from the quarters. The cubs had followed her, keeping to the shadows, watching with curious eyes. The eldest had seen something in the human woman that confused her. When it leaned down to threaten her, the human had not shown fear. Her heart had not raced. Her scent had not changed. She had simply stood there, small and soft and calm, like a stone in a river that lets the water flow around it. Did not understand. But she wanted to. She pulled her siblings back into the shadows as past, and the 3 cubs followed the human at a distance, silent as ghosts. They did not know it yet, but this was the moment everything began to change. The cubs were a problem that no one wanted to solve. Learned this on the second day of negotiations, when arrived at the council chamber without any mention of where his children were. She had asked the station's security chief to check on them, and the report came back quickly. The cubs had escaped their assigned quarters and were hiding somewhere in the lower levels of the station. Should we send a team to find them? The security chief asked through her communicator. Looked across the table at, who was arguing loudly with the union's trade minister about mineral rights. He had not mentioned his cubs once since arriving. No, she said quietly, I will handle it myself. She excused herself from the negotiations, claiming she needed to check on supply arrangements. Barely glanced at her as she left. To him, she was nothing more than furniture that happened to speak. The lower levels of Station Omega-7 were a maze of storage bays, maintenance tunnels, and forgotten spaces that had been sealed off years ago. It was the perfect place for 3 young creatures to hide, and the worst place for to search alone. But she had learned something important in her years as a diplomat. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was show up when no one expected you to. She found them in Storage Bay 14, behind a wall of shipping containers. Heard her coming first. The eldest cub pushed her siblings behind her and bared her small fangs, her amber eyes glowing in the dim light. Stay back, soft one, growled. The words came out rough and uncertain, like she was copying something she had heard adults say. We do not need your help. Stopped walking. She was about 10 meters away from the cubs, close enough to see them clearly but far enough that they might feel safe. Slowly, carefully, she sat down on a nearby crate. The metal was cold through her uniform, but she did not show any discomfort. "I know you do not need my help," she said. Her voice was soft, the same tone she used when speaking to frightened animals on Earth. "But I thought you might be hungry." She reached into her bag and pulled out 3 packages. They were standard nutrition bars, but she had modified them. She had spent 2 hours the previous night researching dietary needs, learning that their cubs needed high protein and certain minerals to support their growing bones. She had heated the bars and added supplements, making them as close to proper food as the station could provide. His nose twitched. Despite her aggressive stance, her eyes kept moving to the food packages. "It could be poison," said, but her voice was less certain now. "It could be," agreed, "but it is not. I have no reason to hurt you." "You are weak," said. "Weak things always have reasons to hurt strong things. They are jealous. They are afraid. Father says this is the way of the galaxy." Thought about this for a moment. Your father has lived a very different life than I have. He sees the galaxy through the eyes of a predator. I see it differently. How? I see it through the eyes of someone who knows she is not the strongest, someone who has had to find other ways to survive. The smallest cub peeked out from behind. She was tiny compared to her siblings, and her fur was lighter, more gray than black. Her eyes were huge in her small face, and she looked at with open curiosity. "What ways?" asked. Her voice was high and soft, almost like a human child's. Smiled, "Many ways, being smart, being patient, being kind to others so that they might be kind to you in return." She held up the food packages. "Like this. I am giving you food not because I want something from you, but because you are hungry and I can help. That is all." The middle cub stepped forward. He was 8 years old enough to be suspicious but young enough to still follow his stomach. He looked at for permission. Hesitated for a long moment, then slowly she nodded. Walked to and took one of the packages. He sniffed it carefully, then tore it open and took a bite. His eyes went wide. "It is good," he said, surprise clear in his voice. "It tastes like home." Did not wait for permission. She ran to and grabbed a package, then retreated to a safe distance to eat. Was the last. She walked forward with stiff dignity, took the remaining package, and ate it without looking at. For a while no one spoke. The only sounds were the cubs eating and the distant hum of the station systems. Sat quietly, making no move to get closer or to speak. She simply waited. When they finished, finally looked at her directly. "Why are you here? Why did you come looking for us?" "Because someone should," said. "You are children, alone on a strange station far from your home. That must be frightening." "We are not frightened," said quickly. "Do not feel fear." Did not argue, instead she asked, "Where is your mother?" The reaction was immediate. Eyes filled with tears, looked away. His whole body went stiff and her claws dug into the metal floor. "She is dead," said. The words came out flat, empty of emotion. "She died in a battle at the border 4 months ago." "I am sorry," said, and she meant it. "Why, you did not know her. You are not part of our pack." "I do not have to know someone to feel sad that they are gone. I do not have to be part of your pack to care about your pain." Stared at her. In her 10 years of life, no one outside her family had ever said anything like this to her. Among the weakness was hidden, pain was buried, and comfort was only given within the closest bonds of pack. The idea that a stranger, an alien, a weak, soft human might care about her grief was impossible. And yet looking into his eyes saw no lie, no trick, just simple, honest kindness. "You are strange," said at last, "very strange." "I have been told this before," replied, "many times." Crept closer, still holding her empty food package. She stopped just out of arm's reach and studied with intense curiosity. "Your fur is wrong," said. "It only grows on the top of your head. Why?" laughed softly. Humans are like this. We lost most of our fur a very long time ago. Does it not get cold? Sometimes. We wear clothes to stay warm, and we build shelters and make fires. That sounds like a lot of work, said seriously. It would be easier to just have fur. Perhaps, but we learn to solve our problems in other ways. That is what humans do. We are not strong or fast or dangerous, so we had to become clever instead. Had been listening quietly. Now he spoke up. Father says humans are the weakest species in the galaxy. He says you only joined the Union because you would have died without protection. Your father is partly right, said. We are weak in many ways, but we have survived for a very long time on our world, and we did it without the help of anyone else. We faced predators much larger than us, climates that should have killed us, and challenges that seemed impossible, and we are still here. Hal asked. Looked at the three cubs, these children who had lost their mother and been dragged across the stars by a father who did not seem to know how to love them. She saw the fear they were trying to hide, the loneliness they would never admit, the desperate need for someone to tell them they mattered. I will tell you, she said, if you want to hear. The cubs looked at each other. Then, one by one, they sat down on the floor of the storage bay, facing, their amber eyes bright with something that might have been hope, and began to tell them the story of humanity. She told them about the ice ages, when humans had survived by working together and sharing warmth. She told them about the great hunts, where humans had chased animals for days without stopping, outlasting prey that was faster and stronger. She told them about the first fires, the first tools, the first cities built by creatures who should have been nothing more than food for larger beasts. She told them that weakness was not the end of a story. Sometimes it was the beginning. The cubs listened until the station's lights dimmed for the night cycle, and when finally stopped talking, she realized that Little had fallen asleep with her head resting against its knee. Saw this and tensed, ready to pull her sister away, but did not move, did not react with disgust or discomfort. She simply sat there, letting the small cub rest against her, as natural as breathing. Something shifted in his heart, something she did not have a name for yet. We will go back to our quarters now, said quietly, but you could come to see us tomorrow if you want. Smiled, I would like that very much. The days passed slowly on Station Omega-7, and the negotiations continued to go nowhere. Demanded exclusive mining rights to 3 star systems. The Union offered 2. Neither side would move, and every session ended with slamming his fist on the table and storming out. The other diplomats were growing nervous. Some had already begun preparing reports about the failure of the mission. But while the adults argued and threatened, something else was happening in the quiet corners of the station. Visited the cubs every day. At first, it was just to bring them food and make sure they were safe. But soon, it became something more. She would find them waiting for her in the storage bay, their eyes bright with excitement, eager to hear more stories about Earth and humanity. She told them about the oceans, vast bodies of water that covered most of her planet. Could not understand how humans survived near so much water without gills, and had to explain swimming, which the cubs found both terrifying and fascinating. She told them about mountains that touched the clouds, deserts that stretched farther than the eye could see, and forests so thick that sunlight never reached the ground. Your world sounds dangerous, said one afternoon. So many different places that could kill you. It is dangerous, agreed, but it is also beautiful. Humans learned to live in all of these places. We adapted, we changed. We found ways to survive where survival should have been impossible. Because you are stubborn, said. There was a hint of respect in her voice now. Yes, laughed. We are very stubborn. It is perhaps our greatest strength. The cubs began following around the station, at first from a distance, then closer and closer. The other species on the station noticed and whispered among themselves. A human befriending cubs. It was unheard of. Some thought she was trying to use the children to influence the negotiations. Others thought she had simply lost her mind. Notice, too, eventually, one of his guards reported that the cubs had been seen with the human representative multiple times. His response was a dismissive wave of his clawed hand. "Let her waste her time," he said. "The cubs are useless anyway. Their mother spoiled them with too much softness. Perhaps the human can teach them how to be even weaker." The words were reported back to by a sympathetic Meridian servant. She said nothing, but that night she held a little when the small cub crawled into her lap during story time. On the 10th day of her visits, found alone in the maintenance corridor near the medical bay. He was crouched behind a support beam, watching something through a gap in the wall panels. His tail was twitching with nervous energy. "What are you doing here?" The cub jumped, startled, then relaxed when he saw it was. "Looking," he said simply. "There is a creature in there. It is hurt." Look through the gap. Inside the medical bay, a worker was lying on a treatment bed. His left arm had been crushed in an accident with loading equipment, and the station's medical officer was working to save it. There was making small sounds of pain, his 3 eyes squeezed shut. "Why are you watching this?" asked gently. Was quiet for a moment. "I do not understand," he finally said. "The medical officer is the hurt one is they are not the same species. They are not from the same world. They are not pack. And so why is the helping? What does she gain?" Knelt down next to so they were at the same height. "Maybe she does not gain anything. Maybe she helps because helping is the right thing to do." Shook his head. "Father says everything is about gaining, power, territory, resources. He says creatures only help each other when they want something in return." "Your father sees the galaxy one way," said carefully. "But there are other ways to see it. Some creatures help others because it makes them feel good, because they do not want to see suffering, because they believe that making the galaxy a little bit kinder makes it better for everyone, including themselves." "That sounds inefficient." Smiled, perhaps, but humans have a saying, "What goes around comes around." When you help others, they often help you in return. Not because they have to, but because they want to. Kindness creates more kindness. Thought about this for a long time. Then he asked, "Is that why you help us? Because you want us to help you later?" "No," said. "I help you because you are children who lost their mother and are far from home. I help you because I can. I help you because when I see someone hurting, something inside me wants to make the hurt stop." She touched her chest. "Humans feel this very strongly. We call it compassion." "Compassion," repeated, testing the word. "Yes, it means caring about the suffering of others, even when they are different from you, even when helping them gives you nothing, even when it is hard." The medical bay door opened and the officer stepped out. She noticed and raised an eyebrow. "Commander, is something wrong?" "No," said. "My young friend here was curious about your patient. He wanted to know why you were helping a stranger." The officer blinked her large eyes. "Because he was hurt and I am a healer. What other reason would I need?" Stared at her as if she had said something impossible. Later that night, was sitting in the storage bay with all 3 cubs when asked the question that had been building inside her for days. "Why do the others hate you?" Looked at the small cub. "What do you mean?" "The other species on the station. They look at you with cold eyes. They move away when you walk past, even the ones who are smaller than you. Why?" Was quiet for a moment. "Because I am human, and humans are seen as the weakest species in the galaxy." "But you are not weak," said fiercely. "You are brave. You stood in front of Father without fear. You came to find us when no one else cared. You tell us stories that make us feel strong." "In the eyes of the galaxy, strength is measured by claws and fangs and the ability to destroy," explained. "Humans have none of these things, so we are seen as lesser, as unimportant, as soft." "That is stupid," declared. Laughed, surprised by the cub's boldness. "Perhaps it is, but it is also how things are. I cannot change how others see me. I can only control how I act and who I choose to be." "And who do you choose to be?" asked. Looked at the three cubs, these fierce little creatures who had somehow become so important to her in such a short time. "I choose to be kind," she said. "I choose to help where I can. I choose to believe that strength is not just about power, but about the courage to do what is right even when it is hard, even when no one is watching, even when the galaxy tells you that you are nothing." Stood up suddenly. She walked to and did something she had never done before. She pressed her forehead against the gesture of deep respect and acceptance. "You are not nothing, Sid. You are, and you are Pack." And joined their sister, pressing close, their warm fur surrounding the small human woman who had shown them a different way to see the universe. Closed her eyes and let herself feel the moment. For the first time since arriving on Station Omega-7, she did not feel alone. But outside the storage bay, in the shadows of the corridor, a guard was watching. He had been sent by to find out what the human was doing with the cubs. What he saw filled him with disgust. The cubs were treating the human like Pack, like family, like one of their own. He turned and walked quickly towards quarters. The Alpha needed to know about this. Something had to be done. The guard did not know it, but his report would set in motion events that would change everything. And in the storage bay, surrounded by three cubs who had chosen her as their own, felt a chill run down her spine. Something was coming. She just did not know what. Received the guard's report in silence. He sat in his quarters, surrounded by the trophies of his victories, the skulls and claws of enemies he had defeated over 40 years of combat. His amber eyes stared at nothing as the guard described what he had seen. The cubs pressing their foreheads to the human, the gesture of Pack acceptance, the way they looked at her with trust and love. When the guard finished, did not move for a long time. "Leave me," he finally said. The guard bowed and retreated. The door closed and was alone with his thoughts. His mate had been the soft one in their pack. She had been the one who told stories to the cubs, who held them when they cried, who taught them that there was more to life than fighting and killing. Had allowed this because was strong in other ways, and because the cubs needed a mother's love. But was dead now, killed in a meaningless border skirmish that had achieved nothing, and in the months since her death had watched his cubs grow distant and strange. They did not obey like proper young. They did not respect his strength. They hid from him, ran from him, looked at him with eyes full of something he could not understand. And now they had given their trust to a human, a weak, soft, clawless human who had no right to exist in the same room as let alone claim the loyalty of his children. His claws dug into the arms of his chair, leaving deep gouges in the metal. This could not be allowed. He would end it. The next morning, the negotiation session began like all the others. The council chamber was filled with representatives from a dozen species, all watching and the union's trade minister argued over the same points they had argued for weeks. But today something was different, was calm, too calm. His voice was steady, his movements controlled. He did not shout or threaten. He simply sat and listened as the minister made her latest offer. Noticed the change and felt uneasy. She had learned to read body language over the past weeks, and stillness reminded her of a predator waiting to strike. When the minister finished speaking, stood slowly. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative. Then his gaze settled on. "I have listened to enough words," said. "The union offers us nothing of value and wastes our time with endless talk. This ends now." The minister frowned. "Alpha, we are still negotiating. There is no need for. I invoke the right of dominance." The chamber went silent. Several of the alien representatives gasped. The Meridian communication officer dropped his data pad. Felt her heart stop for a single beat, then start again, faster than before. The right of dominance was an ancient tradition. When negotiations failed, Either party could demand that the dispute be settled through trial by combat. The winner would take all. The loser would receive nothing. By the ancient laws of my people, continued, I challenge the Union's representative to single combat. If she wins, the will accept the Union's terms. If I win, we take everything we have demanded and more. The minister stood quickly. This is unacceptable. Commander is a diplomat, not a warrior. You cannot possibly expect her to. The right of dominance does not care about titles or expectations, interrupted. She is the representative. She accepted this role. Now she must honor it. Every eye in the chamber turned too. She stood slowly, her legs feeling strange and distant beneath her. Her mind was racing through options, possibilities, ways to escape this trap, but there were none. If she refused the challenge, the Union would lose face. They would take it as an admission of weakness. Other species might follow their lead. Everything she had worked for would collapse. I accept, she heard herself say. The minister grabbed her arm. Commander, this is suicide. He will kill you in seconds. Request a champion. Let someone else fight in your place. Looked at the minister. If I ask someone else to die for me, what kind of leader am I? What kind of human? She gently removed the minister's hand. I accepted this position knowing the risks. I will not run from them now. From the observation gallery above, 3 pairs of amber eyes watched with growing horror. Claws were digging into the railing so hard that the metal was bending, was shaking, was crying silently, tears running down her fur. Smiled, showing all of his fangs. The combat will take place at dawn tomorrow. It will be to submission or death. Prepare yourself, soft one. Your last night in this galaxy has begun. He turned and walked out of the chamber, his delegation following. As he passed, he paused and leaned down to whisper in her ear. I know what you did with my cubs. I know you poisoned their minds with your weakness. Tomorrow I will tear you apart, and they will watch. They will learn what happens to soft things in this galaxy. Then he was gone, and was left standing alone in the center of the chamber, surrounded by pitying looks and whispered condolences. Lieutenant appeared at her side. He was a young man with kind eyes and a worried face. Commander, we need to talk about this. There must be another way. There is no other way, said. Her voice was steady, but inside she was terrified. Begin preparing the combat arena. Make sure it meets all the traditional requirements. Commander. That is an order, Lieutenant. Hesitated, then nodded and walked away. Returned to her quarters alone. She stood at the window, looking out at the stars, and wondered if this was the last time she would see them. A knock came at her door. Enter, she said. The door opened, and 3 small shapes rushed in, and threw themselves at her, wrapping their arms around her, pressing their faces into her uniform. You cannot do this, said. Her voice was muffled but could hear the tears in it. He will kill you. Father is the strongest warrior in 20 systems. No one has ever defeated him. I know, said softly, holding them close. Then do not fight, begged. Run away, hide, we will come with you. I cannot run. If I do, everything I have taught you becomes a lie. I told you that strength is not about claws and fangs. It is about having the courage to do what is right, even when it is hard, even when it is terrifying. She pulled back slightly so she could look at their faces. How can I ask you to be brave if I am not brave myself? But you will die, whispered. Smiled, though it hurt. Maybe, but maybe not. Humans are very hard to kill, little one. We have been surviving against impossible odds for a very long time. How? Demanded. How will you survive against him? He is bigger, stronger, faster. He has killed hundreds of warriors. Thought about this. Then she said, your father is a predator. He is used to prey that runs in fear, that gives up when it sees his strength, that dies quickly and quietly. He has never faced something that refuses to stop, something that keeps going no matter how much it hurts, something that would rather die standing than live on its knees. She touched his face gently. That is what humans are. We are the species that would not give up. We chased our prey across entire continents. We walked for days without stopping. We survived ice and fire and everything in between, not because we were strong, but because we refused to accept that we were weak. But even if you do all of that, said, you still cannot hurt him. His fur is like armor. His bones are like steel. Then I will not try to hurt him, said. I will do something else, something he will not expect. The cubs looked at her with confusion and hope. What will you do? Asked. Smiled. I will show him what it means to be human. That night while the station slept prepared, she did not practice fighting moves or study combat techniques. Instead, she ran. She ran through the corridors of the station, around and around, for hours without stopping. She remembered her grandmother's stories about the ancient hunters of Africa, humans who had chased antelope across the savannah until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. She remembered the marathons of ancient Greece, runners who had carried messages across mountains because giving up was not an option. She was weak, she was soft, she had no claws or fangs or armor. But she had something else. She had endurance, she had will, she had the desperate, stubborn, unbreakable spirit of a species that had survived against every odd. Tomorrow she would show what that meant. And somewhere in the darkness of the station, 3 cubs stayed awake all night, pressed together for comfort, praying to gods they barely believed in that the soft one would live to see another dawn. The combat arena had been set up in the station's largest cargo bay. It was a simple circle, 50 meters across, marked by glowing lines on the metal floor. There were no weapons allowed, no tools, no tricks, just 2 bodies and whatever they could do with them. The viewing galleries were packed. Species from across the galaxy had come to watch, though most of them were there to see the human die. Betting pools had been opened, and the odds against were so high that no one would take them. This was not going to be a fight. It was going to be an execution. Stood at one edge of the circle, wearing only her basic uniform. She had removed everything that might slow her down, her jacket, her boots, even her rank insignia. Her bare feet were cold against the metal floor. Across from her stood like a mountain of black fur and muscle. His claws had been sharpened for the occasion, gleaming in the artificial light. His fangs were visible, his lips pulled back in a permanent snarl. He looked at the way a wolf looks at a rabbit. Any last words, soft one? He called across the arena. Took a deep breath. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. Just a question, she called back. Do you know why humans conquered Earth? Laughed. Because nothing else on your weak little world was strong enough to stop you. No, said, because we never stop. The signal horn sounded. The fight began. Moved with terrifying speed. One moment he was across the arena, the next he was in front of, his claws slashing through the air where her head had been a fraction of a second before, but was already moving, ducking under his arm, rolling to the side, putting distance between them. He came after her again, and again, and again. Each time his claws found only empty air, was not trying to fight him. She was not trying to hurt him. She was simply not being where he attacked. The crowd watched in confusion as the pattern repeated. Would lunge, would dodge, would swipe, would duck, would grab and would slip away like water through his fingers. Stand still and fight, roared. No, said simply, already moving again. Minutes passed, then an hour. The crowd grew restless, then confused, then silent with a strange kind of awe. Was slowing down. They were built for power, not endurance. They were apex predators who killed their prey in seconds, not hunters who chased their food across continents, had never needed to fight for more than a few minutes. No enemy had ever survived that long. But this human kept moving. At the 90-minute mark, his breathing was heavy. His swings were wild, uncontrolled, missing by wider margins each time. Sweat darkened his fur. His legs were shaking. And still moved. She was tired too. Her lungs burned. Her muscles screamed. Every instinct in her body told her to stop, to rest, to give up. But she remembered her grandmother's stories. She remembered the ancient hunters. She remembered every human who had ever pushed beyond what should have been possible. She kept moving. At the 2-hour mark, fell to one knee. His chest was heaving, his claws dragging on the ground. He looked up with something new in his eyes. Not anger, not contempt, but confusion. "What are you?" he gasped. Stopped moving. She stood before him, her body exhausted but her spirit unbroken. "I am human," she said. "I am the descendant of hunters who chased their prey until it could not run anymore. I am the child of survivors who walked across ice ages and built fires in the darkness. I am weak, I am soft, and I am still standing." She took a step closer. "You have been fighting me for 2 hours and you have not touched me once. How much longer can you continue? Another hour, 2? I can keep going all day. I can keep going until your heart gives out from exhaustion. That is what humans do. We endure, we persist, we refuse to stop." Stared at her. His whole life, he had believed that strength was everything. That power was the only thing that mattered. And now this tiny creature, this soft, weak thing that should have died in the first second, was standing over him while he knelt in the dirt. "Yield," said softly. "There is no shame in it, only wisdom." For a long moment nothing happened. The arena was silent. Every creature in the gallery held their breath. Then a commotion erupted at the edge of the arena. 3 small shapes broke through the barriers, ignoring the shouts of the guards, and ran across the arena floor, but they did not run to their father. They ran to. They positioned themselves in front of her, facing, their small bodies forming a wall between the fallen alpha and the human woman. Bared her fangs at her own father. "You will not touch her." His voice was shaking but strong. "She is Pack now, our Pack." Little spread her arms wide, tears streaming down her face. "The soft one is ours." The silence that followed was absolute. In culture, there was no greater declaration than cubs choosing their pack. It was a sacred bond, unbreakable by any law or tradition. For cubs to reject their blood father and claim an outsider was something that had not happened in living memory. Looked at his children, these 3 young creatures he had failed to understand, failed to love, failed to protect since their mother died. He looked at the fierce protective stance they had taken around the weakest creature in the room. And he finally understood. Had not made the cubs weak. She had given them something he had never been able to give. The capacity to love beyond pack, beyond blood, beyond the narrow definitions of strength that had ruled his entire life. The human had not stolen his children. She had shown them what their mother had always tried to teach, that true strength was not in claws or fangs, but in the heart that chose to protect rather than destroy. Slowly, painfully, bowed his head. "I yield." The words echoed through the silent arena. Then, as if a spell had been broken, chaos erupted. The crowd was shouting, some in disbelief, others in something that might have been celebration. The Union diplomats were crying and laughing at the same time. Even the other looked shocked. But in the center of the arena, dropped to her knees and gathered the 3 cubs into her arms. They clung to her, sobbing with relief, their fur wet with tears. "You did it," whispered. "You survived." "We did it," corrected, "together." Rose slowly to his feet. He walked toward them and the cubs tensed, ready to defend again. But the alpha stopped a few paces away, his head still bowed. "I have been a fool," he said quietly. "I saw only the strength of the body and ignored the strength of the spirit. I taught my children that weakness was shameful, while you taught them that weakness can become the greatest power of all." He looked with new eyes. "You have earned my respect, human. And more than that, you have earned the love of my children. I do not understand how, but I can see that it is real." Stood, keeping the cubs close. "Your children needed someone to see them, to hear them, to tell them that they mattered. I only gave them what every child deserves." was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that no one in the gallery expected. He knelt before and pressed his forehead to hers, the gesture of deepest respect. "The treaty will be signed on the Union's terms," he said, "and I ask only one thing in return." "What is it?" "Teach me. Teach me what you taught my children. Teach me to be the father they deserve." Smiled through her exhaustion. "That will take time." "I have time. For the first time in my life, I understand that some things are worth waiting for." The treaty was signed the next day. The Union received its terms. They received something far more valuable, a new understanding of what strength could mean. Was offered medals, promotions, postings to anywhere in the galaxy. She refused them all. Instead, she requested to remain on Station Omega-7 as a cultural liaison, building bridges between species who had never learned to understand each other. 3 cubs chose to stay with her. Years later, when completed her trial of Fangs and was asked to name the greatest lesson she had ever learned, she did not speak of combat or conquest. She said, "True strength is not the power to destroy. It is the courage to protect, the patience to endure, and the wisdom to show mercy. I learned this from a human, the weakest creature I have ever met and the strongest soul I have ever known." The story spread across the galaxy, told in 100 languages on 1,000 worlds. They called it the lesson of the soft one. And the cubs who had chosen her, they were called something else entirely. They were called the Fangs of humanity. And they would carry lessons to the stars, proving again and again that the greatest strength in the universe was not found in claws or weapons or the power to destroy. It was found in the courage to be kind.